Good morning, David. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed for the conference. I thought we'd begin by me asking you to sort of introduce yourself in whatever way you feel is relevant for this purpose.
It's my pleasure talking with you this morning and to be one of the participants at this modern foodway, Chinese foodways conference. I am usually known around the world, except in Taiwan, as David Y.H. Wu. I'm Professor Wu. I call myself professor because I've been teaching and doing research for almost 60 years, and becoming a professor at least 40 years ago at the University of Hawaii. But I must say, my people in Taiwan know me as Wu Yanke, which is not supposed to be my native Taiwanese language. Yeah, because there are so many languages and all that. But very briefly, I've been teaching sort of around the world, mainly University of Hawaii, since 1970s, but I started to work in Taiwan at the top Institute of Ethnology since I was 18. And then I came to United States to do graduate work. And so I would call myself a Taiwanese diaspora anthropologist, a lucky anthropologist for life. And then, of course, when I present my formal paper later in the conference, I'll talk more about my background and research and the current research. Should I stop here so you can ask me more questions?
Oh, well, this is a fantastic start. Thank you so much. It sounds like you have obviously a very long and rich background in anthropology. And I noticed that you also have, a qualifications in archaeology. But would you say you're an anthropologist, obviously, first? And how did you get into the field of food studies? How did that transpire?
Yes, that I must say, I'm one of the accidental anthropologists because, as I already said, you may not have heard anyone who became a professional anthropologist uh, since the age of 17, 19, because at that time I was in Taiwan, uh, just fresh from high school, because my father was a political prisoner. I had to come out to work to support myself and to support my mother, who has to look after 7 kids. I'm one of the eldest. Okay, to make a long story very short, I'm one of the unusual Taiwanese, ninth generation, is counting the first migrant from mainland China, Fujian. I'm the ninth generation, but I was born in Beijing.
Ah, okay.
Beijing, China, because my wife, I'm sorry, my father, who of course was born in Taiwan, and his generation, was educated in Japanese, being, Japanese colonial subject. I'm sure we can talk about your background. We share a lot of things in common, right? Yeah. And after, in the 1930s, he finished his universities in Tokyo, Japan, went to the mother country, China, and got a teaching job in Beijing. And so I was born in Beijing, and he was lucky enough because of his broad interest in theater, theatre, early literature in China, and he he was a poem, uh, uh, a very productive poem, writing on a Japanese newspaper every day. So the Japanese considered him a leftist, tried to arrest him, so he escaped to Beijing, and then my mother, a young girl, was his Chinese teacher. Turned out my mother was the grandchild of the first president of University of Beijing, and like my great grandfather, right? And I had no idea until I was growing up in the state. And so a long story is this is how Casey Chan, the famed professor who wrote that great book of China's food history, he one day told me, "Do you know I first time saw you when you were a baby?"
Wow.
I said, how could that be? I met him first. I was 18 years old, already hired at the Academia Sinica. It's like Academy of Science, Institute of Ethnology, as a paint photographer, a painter. I draw all the illustrations, plays of the publications for that institute without nobody's teaching. Oh, he, am I talented?
Wow. Amazing.
I am known in Taiwan, at least from 30, 40 years ago, one of the only two anthropologists who's a great artist and painter. The first
Fantastic.
one is my teacher, Professor Chen Qilu, also educated in Japan, but not Taiwanese. It's complicated. And he got his PhD in Tokyo University based on one volume, a thick painting of the Aboriginal clothing. And well, I became his student in 1958. Yeah, formerly student of anthropology and archaeology at the National Taiwan University. And we discovered each other later. He told me, "Hey, you are the second person I know in Taiwan being professional anthropologist, also painter." Anyway, I talk too much about this, but one thing, how do I begin my research? Not only I work at that Institute of Ethnology, 中央研究院民族学研究所, but the founding father, founding director of the institute, Professor Lin, he was a great musician, a dancer, and all that. Not many people know. And I worked there for 1 year. I thought I wouldn't have money to go to university. I am going to become a professional artist. He said, please, go take the examination and try to enter Department of Anthropology and Archaeology, the only one in Taiwan, become my student. I was good. I passed the examination, means I was ahead of 20,000 young students trying to get into university.
Wow.
National Taiwan University means you must be the top 1%.
It's very
I got
elite.
into anthropology, #1 accepted by the department. A lot of self-boasting. And I met Zhang Guangzhi first time when I was 18 working in the institute. He came back from Harvard University. His professor, Harvard University,
Mm, mm,
he starting with his group of PhD students from Harvard, mostly Americans and one Canadian, to start the archaeology
mhm,
beginning in Taiwan. And then at the dinner, he told the Professor Lin, the director of institute, said, I want to see your young man. There's a Wu Yanfu there. Of course, they didn't know I'm Dave. Later I became David. So I went. I said, who are you? He said, I'm Professor Zhang Guangzhi. You know, my father and your father were good friends in Beijing. Of course, John was 12 years my elder. He said, when I was young, I first saw you. You were a baby. You were born. You lived next door to our place
wow.
because in Beijing, that's the Taiwanese community. They call it Fujian apartment or something. Okay, that's how I begin my research. Learn to do research in Taiwan. But I must add one important point. How did I become a food anthropologist?
Mm,
Since my childhood, since I remember things when I was 3 years with my parents. We traveled from Beijing to Shanghai to Xuzhou and the different places, Nanjing. I remember all the different food. I was multilingual since I was a young kid because my nanny spoke a language different from Beijing from my parents. And then later I was 6 years old, my father took the whole family to Taiwan, by the first boat available up to the war with Japan. I started to notice, to listen. There are so many different languages. We came back to our hometown in Taiwan. The, uh, is the center of the island Taiwan. There, Nantou, and
mhm,
there is a famous resort place called Samong Lake. That's
mm,
where my ancestors settled. I couldn't communicate with my grandma because she spoke the Taiwan dialect, a kind of southern Fujian,
mhm.
and I could only speak Mandarin. So
Ah,
after 1 year, I went to school. Every kid was teasing me, joking with me. I didn't know what they were saying. They say, "Hey, this foreigner, this Chinaman, this Chinese, and
mm,
we are not Chinese, we Japanese." Anyway, it's
mm,
already Chinese.
mm,
Okay, so with my multilingual and uh, sort of diaspora experience before even coming to the United States, I noticed there are different kinds of food at home. We have Taiwanese servants, two servants. My grandma's best cook can but speak something I could understand. I help her in order to learn, communicate and
mm,
learn the native language. So all this started about what the lifelong interest in different kinds of food, even with people saying, oh, Chinese, one people, one cuisine.
mm,
There are, even within any region, there are several languages, several different kinds of food and cuisine. Especially now, it's all global. Okay, I
mm.
stop here. You can ask me further questions.
So, I mean, your interest in food then is very long-standing. It's a deeply personal interest that connected you with your grandmother and others in your background and family. How did you convert that deeply personal interest into food scholarship, into something that you wanted to pursue within your academic career? Was it something that you developed? over time. I noticed that in your bio, you mentioned that if it was from the 90s that you ended up exploring this a little bit more formally. Is that the case? And what prompted that?
Yes, good question. Yes, when I started work at Academia Sinica, before I had anthropology training, and I was lucky enough, not only the director, at that time, just a handful of anthropologists, they call themselves ethnologists, from retreated from mainland China after, the communists won the war, established people republic China. A few scholars, including anthropologists, came to Taiwan. They all were teaching in National Taiwan University or working at Academia Sinica. At the institute, Professor Lin took me in as the assistant. It's just like 19th century anthropology. I became the disciple, and not only that, I had to go to the field with him in South China, riding on the train where I was his sort of private servant. And
Okay.
I appreciate that. The thing is, he snores so loud. You know, in the sleeping tree, his upper deck, I'm lower deck, I couldn't sleep because of his snore. Once arrived in South China, Taiwan, the study, we were going to study the Taiwan tribe
Mm.
in Pingdong, southern Taiwan. And I watched him how he did. Then I had to help with take photos of he and his assistant and one young, anthro students of what they do. But after the first time, I was at the institute working for 1 year.
Mhm.
And then, of course, later, once I was in the university, I became his voluntary teaching assistant, right, for 4 years following him. And the good thing, one of his early students, Professor, but the late Professor Ren Xianmi, unfortunately, he passed away last month at the age of 92.
Wow.
And he took me, he told me, now you are our anthropology assistant, right? Go to read some books. Professor Lin's ethnography. He, Professor Lin was educated in France. Marcel Mauss
Mm.
student.
Wow.
If you know
Mm.
the life passage, most well-known sociologists over 80 years ago. In the 1930s, Professor Lin studied in Paris with him, came back home to do the first thorough, great ethnological fieldwork in northeast China, next to Siberia, a tribe at that time called He or He. Now one of the northern tribe people, one of them is called Ewenki.
Ah,
in
okay.
in
Mhm.
North China. I
Mhm.
know you speak Chinese. You were a good Chinese student. And then I read his ethnography. Good thing it's translated into Chinese, published also in Chinese. So I know the meaning. His study was concentrated on religion. But then in addition, Professor Rain, at that time young research assistant before he came to the United States to do graduate work. He gave me a menu, the British notes of queries.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, if you don't know, then we should take your PhD back.
That's right.
Not the
Yeah.
price. That's your teacher, your teacher's teacher. When they went to Africa, they
Yeah.
they know following that. Oh, but what's next question? So I must tell you, I was a good student in high school. My English was above average. I, well, sorry, self-boasting. I was good in painting, good in Mandarin. I was one of the best students in Mandarin speaking and my English good. So I could read the notes and queries. I took it to the field. The
Fantastic.
southern uh, Taiwan, I started to help the real anthropologists to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, what do you call your father's brother? What do you call your
Mm-hmm.
father's mother and your mother? That's one thing. I said, in the house, I said, what do you call this piece of wall? There's a hole. What do you call it?
Mm-hmm.
I did a great job as a sister. I sensed Professor Yen and I became lifetime friends. I don't mind to tell you, he is the first thick ethnographic report becoming sort of a large part of his PhD dissertation was my work.
Oh,
Because, because I went a
you were
lot
the,
to ask
yeah.
questions and
Mm.
I I talked to the, the Grand Chief. Okay, Taiwan people is one that's known. The only one had this similar kind of nobility system like the Polynesians, the
Mm-hmm.
kingship system,
Mm-hmm.
and wood carvings. Amazing,
Wow.
because according to Taiwan's archaeologists, that's including Australia, New Zealand, and Maori archaeologists, they admit their ancestors came from Taiwan.
Mm.
And the Taiwan people are descendants of one of the original people. So you asked me how I started to study food, agriculture, and production of food. That was important. I followed notes and queries and the other things.
Mm.
My observation talking to the chief, I write down all your notes. I started to study food,
Mm-hmm.
food production, agriculture before I realized that's part of an anthropological work.
Mm.
So with that as a basis, later on, wherever I went to do field work,
Mm.
food production and become an important part of my research. Very
Mm.
quickly tell the chief of that tribe and village. By the way, last year they celebrated 70 years of migrating from mountaintop Taiwan to the village where I started my first field work 17, 18 years old. And the chief liked me so much. She didn't have children herself, took me in as a grandkid. It's just like this. Taught me how to make uh, wine. Have
Ah.
you heard of the kava in Fiji?
Oh, yes. It's
It,
a
it,
ferment. Is
it's
it ferment?
more complicated than that with the tree bark and all. But
Mm.
what the Taiwan chief taught me was what we can call produce the enzyme is from your saliva.
Saliva. Mm.
It chew your cooked the millet, the rice, and then and keep it for a few days and starting fermenting and all that. So when the wine, the millet wine came out, looks beautiful, tastes good. I wouldn't want to drink it.
No.
I learned how process. I helped the chief old lady. You know.
Amazing.
So, and that's my connection with Polynesia. My professor, when I became a professor and became his student at the university, he gave me a direct reading. Go to read the Polynesian, Hawaiian,
Mm,
Polynesian religion. I started there.
mm,
Then I found out even the high gods' name are similar. Uh, Thank God. I think uh, I mean, I'm 80. I keep forgetting.
no problem.
In Hawaii, the high god is Takaroa or something like that.
Hmm.
Taiwan people in Tangaroa.
Oh, very
You
similar.
imagine? So anyway, I read thick book and Polynesia religion by other people can check. This mythologist's name, Howley means white man's. His name seems to be handy or hand.
Hmm.
Anyway, I'll stop here. You can see my how I started research my on food ahead of everybody. I mean, those my good friends who study Chinese food since the 1980s or 90s. Oh, some good ones following KC, Professor KC, 1970s.
Mm.
I first came to the United States. Hey, my good friends are attending this conference. My apologize for saying nonsense. Hey, Woody Watson, Professor Watson, my lifetime friend, Eugene Anderson. I just saw him 4 years ago. Is in Australia. We went to the same conference. I helped to organize food and health. Eugene Anderson was the first one I attended his presentation at the American Anthropology Association when I was a graduate student in the 1990s here at the University of Hawaii.
Hmm.
Okay, I stop here. You can ask me some more.
So it seems like yeah, it sounds like you have a really a sense of a deep understanding of the interconnectivity of your Taiwanese identity, right? Because it took you to the Pacific islands. It helped you kind of ground yourself within these field studies that you undertook for your PhD and beyond. And it sounds like also this sort of diasporic identity that kind of drives you also helped you, I suppose, produce the kind of your foundational texts on the globalizing Chinese food studies that you also then started to shape from the 1990s and definitely the early 2000s. I mean, is that fair? Is there something about your sort of your identity that also propelled you into sort of globalized Chinese food in this way, or were there other forces at play? Um,
Well, actually, I learned about identity, all this concept of ethnicity, and all that when I became a graduate student, in the United States, actually,
mhm,
University of Hawaii. And I, in the night, I first came to Hawaii in 1966 with my first wife, my late wife, who unfortunately passed away 15 years ago.
oh, okay.
And Midori, you just saw, Midori Hino, uh, we married only 10 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not, I thought, oh, wow, her position, they're like yours. In a way, she's Japanese, and she came to China to work because 30 years ago she graduated from university, uh, became a local government official developing internationalization, was sent to Guangzhou. She had an office there, so for 1 or 2 years, up and
Okay.
down. And then when I went to teach at in Hong Kong, Chinese University of
Hmm.
Hong Kong, I went from Hawaii to there, became chair professor of anthropology. 1993, one of the first foreign students under my supervision uh, was Midori Hino, a Japanese
Ah.
student, because she was going to study. She studied Cantonese language formerly, was going to study economic development in South China and doing field work in uh, in several places in Guangdong. That, but when I came in 1966, my lifelong anthropologist partner, my late first wife, She also graduated from the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology, National Taiwan University, two, uh, 3 years junior than I. I
Mhm.
was a senior. I was the president of student union in the department. Took advantage to meet all the beautiful girls, the freshly admitted girls, and one of them was this shy young girl, Wang, is her last name, Wang Weilan.
Mm,
Weilan means virtuous orchid. And
beautiful.
since then, long story short, after 4 years, she graduated, I graduated, I continued working in institute. And then 1966, after I worked in further institute for so many years, we got married, came to Hawaii uh, together. So I must say, her advisor in archaeology was Casey Chang's best student, Canadian Richard Pearson.
Mhm.
Professor Richard Pearson already retired from UBC, Vancouver. Of course, he became a, a best friend. And so she also specialized in Taiwan, the following John Casey down in Japan. And my advice, oh, I'm sorry if I may to mention, span the first from 66 to 69, when Wayland and I both were graduate students. She got her master's degree, and after I got my master and became his candidate, I got an unusual 4-year scholarship from Australian National University. That to do my PhD dissertation, one condition is that I must give up my PhD from University of Hawaii. Forget
Oh.
it. Yeah. But I want to say my advice was Alice Dewey, Indone- Indonesia specialist,
Mhm.
and one of the her fellow student under his PhD student under supervision was President Obama's mother.
Oh, wow.
Oh, and that's why President Obama spent time as a kid in Indonesia following his mother because his mother is followed the teacher Alice Dewey. Alice Dewey was granddaughter of oh, that's prehistory, the famous American philosopher John Dewey.
Oh, wow.
John Dewey taught in Beijing University. That was after my great grandfather stepped down
Wow.
from the, the Beijing University. Hey, can you imagine the global connection? And there's there's no border. And I,
Mm.
I was not special interested in identity. I'm a Taiwanese, but because once I came to the United States, realized my forefather, unfortunately, under that regime, arrested 3 times since 1947. Well, released twice, the third time. Okay, I'm sure you understand from South, in origin from South China. Maybe that didn't even happen in India, Bangladesh. Or something. My father was sentenced to 10 years prison in a tiny island for all the gangsters and the political prisoners.
Wow.
Many of them were doctors in the local elites. So my sympathy with my father. Not only I had to work early, I had to look after my brothers, sisters, and helping my mother, my poor mother. Grandchild of such a rich family,
Mm.
but, but I had to look after them. And then in the United States, going through the Vietnam War
Mm.
protest, end of Vietnam War, it's unfair, so much unfair to the Taiwanese. At that time, you were not allowed to have Taiwanese identity and all that. Then I did some study, found out in the local Honolulu Museum of Art, there's one piece of calligraphy and the painting, painted by the last Qing Dynasty Emperor's mother, Cixi
Mm.
Taiho, Empress Taowa's painted
Mm-hmm.
with poems alongside my great grandfather's writing.
Oh, wow.
And all that. So, so such funny thing, And it didn't realize my poor mother at age before, I guess, before she was 18. She wouldn't tell me, my father wouldn't say anything. And the marriage sort of eloped with my father and came to Taiwan and that. But I would say even there are such discrimination, you know, ethnic against is one tribe, one people looking up down the next tribe,
Mm.
mountain people looking down the seaside, and all that. But people were sympathetic to the poor suffering minority. That's
Mm.
my experience. A lot of people helped me. My whole family was condemned by this Taiwan security at that time by the military general said, "You're not allowed to go out." Even once I got my scholarship, University of Hawaii, in the PA, I went to try to get my passport. They said, "Yeah, sorry, we cannot do anything for you. There's direct order because of your father being, 10 years political prisoner." And
Mm.
then my mother went around to get help. Not, someone who later become the sort of the deputy director of the whole national security of Taiwan, wrote a letter, special permission for this young guy go to study at the university.
Mm.
So, so that's what I think. Also like food, you know, your food are stink, or not edible. That's your people, and our food is that. In the old days, all like that. In my formal talk at the conference, I have pictures and all that to show. Oh, when you serving other country kind of food, it make fun. You like it, but you make fun. So anyway, I talk randomly too much. Please ask me. Oh,
Um,
oh,
I guess I, I guess my question would really be about sort of when you did turn to food in a significant way in the 1990s and 2000s, what kind of challenges and opportunities were there for food research as you were doing it? You embraced ethnography as a field research process. How did it feel to observe um, the catering industry, restaurants, people cooking food? I mean, how did it feel to self-consciously study Chinese food in that context?
Okay, that's very good question. Now we can come back to the theory part, perhaps, because I told you so much about my personal perception, and as you know, I travel around the world. Not only that, one of my major field work, in addition to I wrote a lot about Taiwan Aborigines, was Chinese in Papua New Guinea.
Mm.
I spent 4 years, actually fieldwork 3 years, study one tribe. Why? At that time, golden age, 19 cents of 1969. They
Mm.
gave me such a generous grant. So, because, ANU at that time, social anthropology, I must say, my advisors when I went was two very famous. One is the English guy, A.L. Epstein,
Okay.
and
Mhm.
his wife economist. They first started in South Africa
Mhm.
and then became the chair of anthropology AMU. And then in the department, there was a world-renowned anthropologist who, uh, you know, blamed the American environment. Margaret Mead spoiled all the field work in Polynesia and, the Samoans and whatever. Derek Freeman was 4 years my boss. So nice and good to me because why I'm mentioning all this field work and I started to pay attention to the theory of food. I realized in Kenya, these Chinese, they sort of, when they were born, there's only small number dominate all the business, just like maybe in South Indians in Malaysia, in Southeast Asia, and multilingual and eat all kinds of food. That is it. Where real, authentic Chinese and we got all the tradition and all that. So I started looking into those kind of things. If I may mention some of the big shots in anthropology who started to teach us how to classify food, what's the meaning of food, that's in your mind. You don't eat shrimp or shellfish. It's not something wrong. It's delicious. You're forbidden to eat because wrong classification.
Mm.
I'm talking about Jews. Okay, I must thank a few uh, anthropologists. The late Professor Claude Levi-Strauss.
Mm.
Nobody had my kind of experience. I spent 1 week in the 1979 with him and his pretty young wife at that time. I heard that's her, forgot how many numbers. He's homosexual. 1 week, live together, eat together. He was invited to South Korea to have national seminar to teach them how to do the male, female, up and down,
Oh.
heaven, sea thing.
Mm.
And that's how I started to learn about food from him. He,
Mm.
you see, when I was in Hong Kong, later I tried inviting him to come to Hong Kong. I forgot his age because he replied, I would very much like to go to join you in Hong Kong. You know how old I am. I don't even go to Paris. Let alone fly to Hong Kong. That's my old friend. And one, oh, I forgot to mention important, Sir, late Sir Raymond First.
Mm.
Hey, I was lucky because Professor Alice Stewart, University of Hawaii, she spent a couple of years at the University London. She was a Professor First student.
Okay, wow.
Invited him to Hawaii to teach 1 year. 1968, I was lucky to spend a whole year. My my first partner wife and he liked me so much because my white people use my Aboriginal data on kinship. Boy, he he discovered something. He said, I didn't really realize you taught me something else. In Taiwan, you can find the same kinship system. So Raymond First was one of my former professors recommended, wrote a letter. I believe he must have wrote a letter for me to ANU. Hey, imagine Derek Freeman was his student, received the letter, and all people surprised. This nobody Taiwanese. How come? Raymond First wrote for him say this is excellent student. And I must think, then I had to review all this theory and tie them into my study in writing my report. Now I know I don't have to do this. I can be free, right? But I have to think here, here for them.
Mm.
Yeah, but then because of the distinction, why
Mm.
we eat, because we want to be different, we're above other people. And uh, Arjun Apatirai,
Mm.
one of what I admire the South Chinese uh, religion anthropologists and Arthur Berger, kind of symbolism. But oh, and one more, I study restaurant food.
Mm.
Later, the past 5 years, I was influenced by Krishnendu Ray,
Mm. Mm.
Professor Ray, Columbia University,
Mm.
City
Mm. Mm.
University
Mm.
in New York. And he taught me something that, boy, also the southern so-called Indian restaurant owners. I I recently published paper you can find out about uh, the how the northern Chinese cuisine developed in the U.S. I used this idea. Professor Ray's idea said, actually, restaurant owners, northern Chinese in the 50s, 70s, they were all accidental restaurateurs. And you are a graduate student, came to the United States,
Mm.
well, if you have no money, no scholarship, you best
Mm.
way is working in the restaurant, open a restaurant of your own.
Mm. Mm.
And back in South China, these are, oh, I mean, they at home, no man should go to the kitchen, touch the food. Now they all consider themselves chefs. All that. So one most important anthropologist, Sydney Means, of course, after I arrived in Hong Kong, my good friend, Professor Watson, said, hey, Sydney, once after he retired, that time he was retiring, he said, like to come to Hong Kong. How about, so, teach for a few months. How about that? So I met Sydney in the Anthropological Association there. I said, most welcome. And so I arranged to have him come to teach. He and I joined the talk the very first course on anthropology and food.
Mm.
His Professor Mings was the main lecturer, at the Chinese university, right? I taught some part. I was learning from him. The class generated largest enrollment. We had to stop to limit 100.
Wow.
You know, anthropology class used to be special in the old days in Taiwan. 4 students, 10 students every year they want to come to be involved. That class, all different, what whatever, different schools, different neighbors, all came. They heard about American most famous the professor of food, the the one who started to tell us why uh, English have tea time, why drink tea, the sugar and then sugar plantation, the whole Caribbean,
Mm.
all American slaves.
Mm.
That is to food. That's simply means. These books become so popular. Other people start to want to read and learn from it. And imagine coming to Hong Kong for 1 year, enjoy all the best international food, the Indian food, this food, and
Mm.
that food. He was so happy, earning more than when he was full professor teacher. Hong Kong had the highest salary because of the British colonial time. I realized I found, you know, I already earned a very high before I went to Hong Kong. It's not for money, right? It's for experience because uh, go to read my autobiography, realize I started learning to speak Cantonese because one Cantonese family. I was fifth grade in grade school when my father was in prison in a small island, Green Island,
Oh,
the
yes.
island of Inferno, 火烧岛,
Mm. Mm.
one Cantonese family, they're from Guangzhou, engineer, professional engineer. The, the anyway took me in for 2 3 years. And so I started to hear Cantonese. I learned my first Cantonese language there. That's why I dare to go to Papua New Guinea, pick up this tribe. There you say, we have been studying, Epstein and his students studied, uh, so many students when we went to Papua New Guinea, 700 languages, 700 tribes, and only one tribe we couldn't study. Mysteria tribe. They call themselves Chinese. So they
Mm.
assigned me to study the Chinese in Papua New Guinea.
Mm.
I had to learn the strange language. You did fieldwork in Guangzhou and Macau and Hong Kong, I'm sure, in South China. I learned the Siap and Siyi, Taishan, Taiping, uh, the four places. The 200 years ago, 100 years ago, Cantonese came to the United States to work. These are all Taishan farmers. I learned that language, so I dared to go to New Guinea to study with my fellow Chinese. Turn out they learn Mandarin because they asked me to teach a course on Mandarin. They couldn't even speak in Mandarin, couldn't even speak in proper uh,
Mm.
Cantonese. Here, let me demonstrate. How do you count? Let me give a test, see how good your Cantonese. I
Oh,
know
no.
you. And from one to 10, can you count in Cantonese? Mandarin you can.
Mandarin, yes, yes, that's true.
1、2、3、4.
Yeah.
他先过，
5、6、7 yeah.
哎，很好，5、6、7
哦，
也是很好，很好。
谢谢你。
Cantonese is一一1、2、3、4、5、6、7、8、9、10。The
Mm.
Cantonese I learned
Wow.
in order to introduce all people in Papua New Guinea. 1、2、3、4、5、6、
Oh,
7、8、9、10.
wow.
You imagine. And I started study with the book written by some missionary. So that's how I say the difficulties study food. I have to have challenge of names and the language. Once you overcome, you know a lot about the meaning of the food, how people appreciate.
It sounds like uh, your time in Hong Kong and how you organized, it became a bit of a hub. Also with Sidney Mintz and his sort of year-long sojourn in Hong Kong, sounded like Hong Kong became a hub for Chinese food studies, East Asian food studies. Is that a fair assessment during your tenure there as well in
Yes,
the mm-hmm.
I you are right. Once I arrived in Hong Kong, in addition to all the general courses, anthropology, I gave a few new courses, anthropology of, uh, medicine,
Mm,
medical anthropology, psychological anthropology,
mm,
cross-cultural study of culture and health, mental health, and all that. But one thing I discovered, because before I went to teach in Hong Kong, starting after I got my PhD and started work at the East West Center here in
mm-hmm.
Honolulu, I I had chance to go to Asia, and every time passing through Hong Kong. So about 10 or 15 years before I went to teach, I already found passing through Hong Kong as tough. I must say I and my late first wife had the best food in Hong Kong. I'm sure you will agree. Whether it's French, Italian, Indian food, I enjoy very much, and all kinds of Chinese food, the
Mm,
Shanghai, Beijing,
mm,
they have funny names for it. Whenever I order or talk to people, because I told you I learned Cantonese when I was a kid, right? They heard my accent. They said, "Oh, you Shanghainese. You must like Shanghai food." Anybody who doesn't speak properly Shanghainese and anybody looks dark, you are Indian. Right?
yeah. Mm,
Yeah. So I must. Then I arrived in Hong Kong. And almost the first day, I said, "Who's the chairman of anthropology?" I forgot the British system. You are. I said, "What? I want to be a professor here so I can enjoy life." I said, "No, they hire you professor. There's only one. You are the one. You are the chairman." So I said, "Yeah, too bad." I said, "And in addition to enjoyment, anybody has studied food in Hong Kong as the main research project?" They said, "Are you kidding?" The dean and so and other, and I talked to the vice chancellor. Hey, you anthropology, you study things we don't understand. So you must, you guys teach something, you say something or study. We don't understand. What do you guys are doing? What are you doing? I said, we must start to study something that you understand. That's my interest. Let's study food. Uh, Go to read my autobiography, then you write, I got first time the largest grant under the title. That was English went away before 97. I got a grant entitled. I invite social, top sociologists and our colleague in Chinese University, Hong Kong University, and a graduate student cooking up Hong Kong identity.
Oh, lovely.
I do not project. Hey, I got a grant UGC University Grant Council at that time. It's not, of course, I know there are insider help. One of the person who reviewed the project was, I guess, that Uli Watson. Yeah, that's good. So, eh, 1 million Hong Kong dollars,
Wow.
and then shocked the whole college in Chinese university. So we heard there's what anthropology got a new professor coming. Don't know what he what how he pulled. He got such a big plan. Just started the local charts hunting.
Mm,
You know,
amazing.
yeah, local charts hunting. The summer the bitter tea and some whatever
Mm,
food and the restaurant. Ooh, how did they pull? How did they pull? So 2 years started, and then I started to have conference, internet
mm,
invited important food foundation in Taiwan, the the 中华饮食文化基金会
mm.
Chinese dietary uh, uh, foundation for Chinese
Dietary culture.
dietary
Mm,
culture.
mm,
But they were before I went to Hong Kong, they were at least for a decade starting to funding people at conference, study Chinese food at international conference. And the first time they were able getting out of Taiwan, got them to come to Hong Kong at the first international conference. Of course, they have money, right? The Chinese university were happy of the best conference food. I mean, for members, the first day, the last day. So that's about how I started talking. And later on, that's a history. I started globalizing food in the United States, the whole history. Food in Japan,
mm,
Chinese food in Japan. Thanks
mm.
to Midori, my wife. Oh, because I have to every year spend my my best time in Japan, the spring and the autumn, there to to give lecture, join the local conferences, join Midori, and study Chinese food. Study Chinese food means we go out to eat every day in different restaurants, in different places. Yeah, not bad.
It's pretty good. It's a pretty good gig. So
Okay,
so so
hey,
y-
yeah,
you
we talk
you
about town. So anything else? Yeah, please.
I just a sort of a last couple of reflections really. It sounds like you really staked out food as a legitimate interest in your time in Hong Kong and in other places as well. So what do you think about the future then of Chinese food studies in particular? Are there any things that excite you, or are there things in the horizon that you are excited about in terms of Chinese food studies?
Well, in recent years, well, the past decade, so past few years, people already know. There's no single food stay in one place for 1,000 years or 100 years. That's what we used to believe 50 years ago before anthropology studied food. They said, oh, Chinese food. Then they started to look at the history, the poem, 1,000 years ago, all that. Actually, we all realize now there's no such thing as Chinese cuisine, right? Or no such thing as Japanese cuisine. Or, well, especially South China. I don't know. You are what would you call yourself? But I think I must say, even I started with saying Taiwanese American diaspora anthropologist, but I'm a world citizen. Just like
Mm.
food, it's all changing almost daily, and so wow, they are everywhere. Chinese food everywhere. So what is important? Anthropology is very helpful in a sense, I must say, help us to understand, well, especially with the virus, with this big pandemic, I mean, unfortunately, oh, this big difficult thing for we human beings. That's
Mm.
the, remember my first day in anthropology is anthropology is study of man. At, at that time, they don't say man and woman. They study of man. Man is human being. But really, study food help us to understand so much of our world, the current social relations, or the current, you know, what stop us for doing something, help us to understand other people, to get to know each other. By the way, my wife, Midori Hino, just wrote two papers last year. I could, oh, already year before last year, October. The Chinese Food Foundation, in fact, they sponsored a conference in Hanoi, Vietnam.
Ah, mhm.
Because of my heart condition, I didn't go, but my wife Midori went. Pub- Published a paper talking about internet and all the IT and all this with food. There's a very popular word among even in Japan, in Taiwan, in China, and not in the United States yet. Yet, I don't know about London. Good food is your cell phone eat first. What does that mean? You take photo, take picture,
Yeah,
and
that's
then with the Facebook and all the Twitter or whatever, in 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 a few seconds, the whole world know. Wow, Dr. Dawes was eating such thing we never heard of in Timbuktu.
yeah.
Right? So that's the future of anthropology. Limitless, but you have to focus on your scope.
Mm.
How to help us to better understand each other, help each other. We're like in the United States these days, we're all in this together. All means, hey, you in London, I'm in Honolulu, whoever
Mm.
later here there's in China, in Atlanta,
Mm.
wherever. Right? Yes. So
Mm.
that's kind of magic. I hope we can all overcome this difficult time. At
Mm.
least if I might come, if I have a chance, maybe and I come to London. I've been to London. That was in the 70s, 80s, several times. I have long story to tell, but I'd like to come back to try the new food.
Ah,
see what's happening.
mm,
Especially, you know, you used to think, oh, there's, you know, when I go to London, I would try all kinds of English food at that time, 30 years ago. I said, oh, not edible. You know, better go Chinese or Indian or go to
yeah.
a bar.
Mm,
It,
mm.
I'll stop here. Anything else? Or thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for your time, and thank you for your wonderful sharing your wonderful thoughts, and also your background, and yeah, and your you know, important parts of your life history that have defined your relationship with Chinese food studies. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much, David. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. 谢谢.
Uh, I will,
再见.
Zaijian, I will stop recording now, and
Ah.
then, and then